Years ago, we had computers that didn't do any graphics. They were strictly text using ASCII characters. Monitors back then were black with either green text or amber text. But people started doing graphics very creatively with characters. And here's an example that I think is really cool. It's a lion just using normal letters from the keyboard. But somebody figured out how to make this lion look pretty nice. And that's what we call ASCII Art. Well, in our project in this lesson, we're going to create some ASCII art. We're going to do very simple shapes using basically just one character. And we're going to let the user specify the character they want to use. It might be an X, it might be an asterisk, it might be an A. But let's take a look at the project we're going to create here in Python just to do some basic shapes. And in this project, we're going to use a while loop with a sentinel value to allow the user to do multiple graphics or choose from different graphic choices without exiting the program. And then we're going to use some for loops to create the graphics, and we're going to use nested for loops where we're creating characters on each row and multiple rows to generate a basic shape. Now Python's kind of cool in that it has a print statement that allows us to take a character and multiply the number of times we want that to print. And that actually can bypass the need to do nested for loops to do what I'm going to show you in terms of our shapes. However, a lot of languages don't have that multiplied print statement available to them. And so the nested loops become more important from a programming fundamental or programming theory perspective as you might explore other programming languages besides Python. Let's take a look at our program in Python that I'm going to have you write in this lesson. So here's our program. We're going to create some basic shapes using a specified character, and the creation of the shapes will utilize nested loops. And I'm going to do a little bit with nested loops, but also show you how in Python you can do some of the same things using that character multiplied print statement. So we're specifying some instructions here for the user. They can choose different shapes to look at. The rectangle, triangle, and diamond, we're going to have the user enter the size they want in terms of the number of rows. And then we're going to create a fir tree, which basically is a triangle with a rectangle below it. And then we'll create a sailboat, which is some triangles, and then the whole of the boat is a basic shape where we narrow down the number of characters as the rows go downward. So we'll start with the rectangle. I'm going to specify the letter A. We can choose what kind of character we want to use. I'm going to use an asterisk. And the number of rows, I'm going to say 7 rows. And I want 20 characters in each row. And there's my rectangle. Let's try this again. Again, I'm going to do A. This time I'll use an X. I'm going to do 17 rows. And I want 60 characters in each row. And there is our larger square, 17 by 60. Let's do a triangle. Say B. I'm going to stick with the X. And I want 11 rows. There's my triangle. Let's do another one, B. This time I'll use an A. And I'm going to do 21 rows. A little bit larger triangle. Let's try C, which is a diamond shape. And again, I'll use X. And I want to have, notice it's saying here I need an odd number of rows. So if I do something like I want 20, it's going to keep asking me to enter an odd number until I actually do that. And the number, also if the number I entered is below 3 or greater than 31, such if I put in 40, it again is going to ask me a repeated time to enter an odd number of rows between 3 and 31. So there's a loop there that's happening where we're checking to make sure that the value they enter, the numeric value, is within that range of 3 to 31 and that it's an odd number. So let's make it 21. And there is my diamond shape. The D is a fir tree. It's just of a one size. I don't have the user specify how large it is. And again, we'll use an X. And there's our little fir tree. It's just a triangle we saw earlier with a rectangle below that. And then the sailboat Again, we'll use X's. And there's our sailboat. So we have 2 triangles for the sails, and then 4 rows of X's for the hull of the boat. And if I press F, that will end my program, and we get a little print statement there saying thanks for using the ASCII Art program. So that's what we're going to create in this lesson. Let's go ahead and jump into a new file in Python. So in the Python shell, I've gone to the File menu and chose New File. Here's my new file. I'm just going to go ahead and save this file. CIS 156. This is going to be 04B. And ASCII Art 2. And obviously I've already created this. ASCII Art 2. Because I've created a previous one, the one you saw running. And I'm just going to click Save. I'm going to start simply by putting a comment and then my print statements that basically describe what this project does. And notice I use the triple quote to do the formatting of multiple lines. And then I've added the print statements of the instructions that I want to the user of the different types of shapes we're going to create, and the letters that go with the choice that they can make. And then I'm going to start with a variable called shape selection, and it's going to equal an input statement. We'll ask them to enter the letter of your choice. And I might say A, B, C, D, E, F. And we'll put a colon and a space. We'll close that quote and do our parenthesis. Now I'm going to repeat while shape selection does not equal F. And because I want this to always be an uppercase letter, at the end of my input, I can add the upper method. So if they put in a lowercase f, that'll force it to be an uppercase F. And I don't have to worry about here in the loop whether it's uppercase or lowercase. And we'll use these letters throughout this loop. So that way I'm only doing the dot upper once. Okay, so within our while loop, we're going to have opportunities to create each of these 5 shapes, and we'll use if statements to determine the selection that the user made. So if shape selection equals A, and I'm using the uppercase A since we did the 2 upper over here on our input statement. Need my colon. And for now, I'm just going to create a comment that this will create a rectangle with user specs. So I'm going to create my whole shell here first, and then we'll come in and fill in each of the pieces. So I'm going to copy and paste. This will be B. This is going to create a triangle. I'm going to paste again. This will be C. This we're going to create a diamond. Next one is D. And here we're just going to create a fir tree. We're not going to use user specs. It's going to be just one size. And then E is going to be create a sailboat. That's probably the harder one to do. Once we've drawn the shape they've selected, we want to give them a chance to input and create another selection. So what I'm going to do is just simply copy my input line, and I'm going to paste that outside of these if structures, still within my loop. And then once that loop is done, so they're going to get a chance to enter another letter. If they press F, this loop will exit. And then after that loop, I'm just going to print Thanks for using the ASCII Art application. And I'll just space that out with the new line character in front and the new line character after. So that is the shell of our program. What we need to do now is come in and fill each of these ifs sections to present or display the different shapes. So I'm going to start with our rectangle. So we're going to allow the user to decide what type of character they want to draw with. So we're going to create an input statement of enter the character you would like to use. We'll do a colon, a space, and close our quote. And so I can choose to use an asterisk or an X. Or some other letter. I'm going to create a variable called rows. I'm going to set it equal to 0 because then I'm going to use a while loop and I want them to enter the number of rows, but I'm going to give them some parameters. So while rows is less than 3 or rows is greater than 30, we're going to repeat an input statement that enters the value into rows. We'll say enter the number of rows for the rectangle, and I'm going to say 3 through 30. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the length of each row. And so I'm just going to copy this and paste it. We're going to change rows here to length. So length equals 0. And I'm going to do this while length is 3. We're going to give them up to 60 characters on each row. So the max size would be 30 by 60 of our rectangle. I'm going to change my instructions to include 60. And so until they enter a number between 3 and 60, that's going to keep repeating. Then I'm simply going to print a blank line just to separate the item that we're drawing from this information and from these input statements. We're going to use a loop. I'm going to use a variable of r in range. And the number of rows that I want is what they inputted, which is the number of rows. I'm going to start with 0. It's going to go to that number of rows, but it's exclusive. Need my colon. And so we're going to print one row at a time, but in each row we want to print the appropriate number of characters that they have chosen. So I'm just going to say for C for C in range, and here we're going to use length. And I'm going to print then char. And it's going to print one char at a time. I don't want a new line character. I want to stay on my current print line. So we're going to set the end to nothing so it doesn't give us a new line. And then when that's done, I do want to end the line. I'm just going to do a space. And that'll give us a new line character. And then when that whole loop is done, let's print another blank line to separate it from the next input statement. So I copied and pasted this second loop. This should be length. And I want to change the input statement to enter the length of each row of the rectangle. Okay, let's give this a try and see if it worked. So we're going to run. And we've got a slight problem here.
And we need to do something in each of these forks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my print statement. And that'll make Python happy. It expects some executable statement in each of those forks. Let's run this and see if it works. So here's our output. We're going to choose letter A. We're going to use an X. Let's do 10. And so one thing I forgot to do is to convert my string to an integer. So we're getting this type error of that it does not support between instances of string and int. So we're going to come back up here and fix that. So rows needs to be an integer, as does our length. And let's try this again. Once again, we'll choose letter A. The character we want to use this time is an X. We're going to go a length of 10. And I think on the row here, let's do 2 to make sure that our loop is working. So it forces me to re-enter. I'm going to do a 61. And it actually took the 61, so I'd want to go back and fix that. And I see my error in the code, but it worked. So I got 10 rows of 61 X's each. Now, the reason that 61 was acceptable was, again, in my copying and paste, I didn't change something here. It's one of the dangers of copying and pasting your code. I want to make sure this rows is length in my while loop. So as we make changes, we want to retest. I'm going to run this again. And let's do A. This time I'm just going to do a different letter. I'm going to do an O that we'll use. Let's test this one. 2, 31. So it forces me to use a value between 3 and 30. And let's just say 17. And then enter the length for each row. And again, if I say 2, that doesn't work. If I say 61, that now doesn't work. So let's just go with 50. And there is my rectangle of 17 rows. And if we counted these, there would be 50 O's there. And then to end our program, we simply do an F. And we get the thanks for using the ASCII Art application. So now we need to come back and create the triangle. So I'm going to do the same thing here of letting them enter a character and the number of rows. So I'm going to copy that code, come into our triangle and paste that code. I want to do another print statement. Again, just to separate the drawing from the text above, the input statement. Let's change this text here to be triangle. So we're entering the number of rows for the triangle. We need to know what is the width of that bottom row. The first row is going to be 1 character, the next one's going to be 3, the next one will be 5, and so forth. So the number of characters in the very last row would be dependent on the number of rows. Let's create our loop again for R in range of rows. And then we'll create our length variable. And the length is going to be, in the first row, 1 star, in the next row, 3 stars, the next one is 5. And so the length is mathematically related to the number of the row. So the first row is 1, the second one is 3, and so forth. So I can calculate this numerically. I'm going to take R and subtract 1 and multiply that by 2 and then add 1. So let's think about this. If R is 1, my first row, 1 times 1 minus 1 is 0. So 0 times 2 is 0, plus 1 will get me 1 character. But in the second row, 2 minus 1 is 1, times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3, gives me 3 characters. In the third row, 3 minus 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And so each row I'm going to get 1 plus the row number minus 1 times 2. That will give us our length. And then we can do basically what we did up here for our C. In fact, I'm just going to copy this code and paste it here. And that should give us our triangle. Now, the problem we're going to get here is we're going to get a triangle where the left edge is flush. And what I'd like to have is a triangle. If I can go back to my examples here, I like a triangle where the apex of it is pushed over and we have basically an isosceles triangle. So I need to add some spaces before this. So what I need to do is know how many spaces do I want. And again, I can calculate that mathematically. So I have a variable called spaces. I'm going to take the rows and subtract from the length, but I'm going to do an integer division on the length by 2. So rows is going to be the number of rows they put in. Let's say they put in 10. So on my first row, it's going to be 10 minus the length, which was 1, divided by integer division by 2, which would give us a 0. I'm going to get 10 spaces. And in doing things like this, you might have to play around with this mathematical expression a little bit to make sure it works. I'm going to put a comment here that this is the number of preceding spaces, which should go down as we create more rows. There should be less spaces because we're going to do a wider number of characters. So I do need to create those have those spaces in my print statement here. So I'm going to do another loop, and we can do the same thing for C in range. And here, though, our range is going to be spaces, and instead of char, we want to print a space. Okay, and I think that should give us all the spaces we need, all the characters we need on each line. Printing another space at the end of that just to force it to the next line. And when that is all done, we'll print a new line character. Let's run and see if that worked. So this time I'm going to use B, and I'll use an A for my character, and I want 10 rows. And there is our 10 row triangle. Let's try it again. Let's do B. We'll use A again because I like the point of that A for my triangle. And this time let's do 30. And so the more rows I have, the further to the right it pushes the triangle because it's adding more spaces before each letter of my row. Okay, that seemed to work. Let's exit with F. And now we're ready to create our diamond. Now the diamond is much like creating the triangle, except we're going to create 2 triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down at the halfway mark. So once again, we're going to let the user enter the number of spaces and the character they want to use. And I am simply going to copy my triangle code and paste that in. And again, we'll keep our specs from 3 to 30, but I want them to enter an odd number of rows, because we want to have one row in the middle that's longer than the row above and below. So I'm going to say enter. In fact, I'm going to capitalize this in my instructions. Enter odd number of rows. We'll let them go from 3 to 31. But this time in my while loop, well, I want to make sure it's 3 and not greater than 31. I also make sure that's an odd number. So while rows is modulus 2 equal to 1, or it's actually we want, so if it's an even number, we're going to say it's equal to 0. Then if it's even, it forces them to enter an odd number, and we'll test that. So they enter an odd number. Let's say they put in 11, and I want to take my first triangle and have that pointing up. It's going to be half that number of rows. So here I'm going to take rows and do an integer division of 2. And then that middle row of our diamond will be in the bottom half. We'll create that. So I'm going to put a comment here that this is the top half of our diamond. And at this point, I'm just going to test this little piece. So let's run this. Now we're doing C. I'll use an X. And if I put in an even number like 6, I'm told re-enter it. So let's use 11. And we should get 5 rows of the top half of our diamond. And we're only getting 4. So what I want to do is come back over here and look at my range. And because I'm using an odd number, I'm going to add 1 to my number of rows. And we'll try that and see if that gets us what we want. So again, C, use an X, let's put in 11, and now I get my 5 rows. And let's exit. So now I'm going to take my loop. This time we want to use it for the bottom half. So I'm going to copy and paste. This will be the bottom half. So for the number of rows in our loop, I want to do this as going backwards. So we're going to start with the number of rows and go downward so that the R value is wider at the top of our triangle and smaller at the bottom. So it's an inverted triangle. And I think everything else would stay the same. Let's just test this. So again, we're going to say C. We'll use X. We'll do our 11 again. There then is my diamond with 11 rows. And the middle row is created on that bottom half and is a little bit extended. So that's our diamond. Let's just test it one more time with maybe something bigger. So we'll do C. Again, I'm going to do an X. Let's just make sure our range is correct. So if I do a 33, can't do that. If I try doing a 1, can't do that. If I simply do a 3, I get a very small diamond. It's kind of even hard to tell that's a diamond. Let's try it again with our maximum value. We'll do 31. And there then is our large diamond. Now, I just want to mention that in Python, you can get by without using these nested for loops. But this assignment is about using nested for loops because in a lot of languages, you don't have the multiplied print statement. And what I mean by that is I could replace this for loop with a print. I want to print a space times spaces. And I'm simply going to comment out these 2 lines. And we'll do the same thing in our character statement. I want to print char times length. And again, I'm going to comment out those 2 statements. And let's test that. So we'll do C, we'll do X, we'll do 13. That didn't quite work here, and the reason is I didn't put my end. So I need to come back to my code. Actually, we're going to end this. I'm going to make sure that we don't create a new line at the end of this. After we print our characters, I do want to do a new line, so I'm not going to put the ending of nothing there. I just need it here, and let's run this again. So C, 13, oops, make sure you use a character, use an X, 13, and so I'm still getting blank lines in between, and the reason for that is I have this print statement still here from before. I need to get rid of that. So I wanted to show you the process of working through a problem, and sometimes you don't get the results you want. You got to go back to your code and figure out why is that. and then just make changes to your code. So let's run this again. Let's try it. C, X, 13, and there we go. So two different ways of doing this, one using nested fors, one just using print statements. Now since this is a project on nested for loops, I'm going to come back and comment these out the other way. I'll leave my print statements in here just to show that there's another option. And I'm going to bring this last print statement back. And again, just to make sure that's all working, I'm going to run. C, X, 21. And there's our diamond shape. Now the fir tree is basically creating a rectangle with a triangle on top. So for the fir tree, we're going to use the top half of our diamond shape, and I'm just going to basically copy this code and paste. We'll get the character for the user. My number of rows though is going to be 12. And I can get rid of this loop. We're going to just do a standard size, not ask them for input. And then let's just test that portion of it. So here we're going to do D. And I'll use an A again. And so there's the top half of my tree. Now, I wanted 12 of these, not 6. And the reason I got 6 and not 12 is remember we cut that diamond in half. So I could either take rows and make it 24. The best thing would be to change my R here to 13 in the range. That's going to give me 1 through 12. And then I could actually take rows and make that 12 here and really get rid of this line. And let's try that. So again, we're going to take D. We're going to use an A. So that's the first part of my fir tree. Now I need to draw a rectangle under that. So we're going to do another loop here for the trunk of our tree. We'll use R again. And my range here is going to be 4. So let's go from 1 to 3. We'll do 4 rows. And I need some spaces in front of that. So let's do 4. And I'm just going to do N in range. And I think I'll do 9 spaces. We might have to play around with this number a little bit. And here we will print a space. And we're going to choose to not do a new line character. So end with nothing. And we'll do for N in range. And this is going to be a number of characters straight across to create the rectangle. And I think we'll go 7. And let's print, in this case, our char. But and again, I don't want to end this. Putting one character at a time. But then after that is done, we want to print a space. And that'll force the next line. Got a couple blank lines in here I'm going to get rid of. Let's test that and see if it worked. So now we're doing letter D. I'll use an X. And there is my fir tree. So the last one to do is the sailboat. And this one's a little more complicated. Let me scroll up here in our executable code so we can see what the sailboat's going to look like. We're going to build 2 triangles with a couple spaces in between. And we're going to use that white space as the mast of our sailboat. So I need a triangle that's going to make a right edge here and a left edge here. So 2 different triangles. And I said this one gets a little more complicated. So back in our code, and to save some time, I'm just going to paste in the code from my previous work on this and walk you through it. So as before, we're going to take the input for the character. We're going to print a new line character, give us some space, and then we're going to figure out the size of the sails. Again, I'm going to use 12 rows. It's just going to go from 1 to 12, actually 11 rows, I guess. We're going to figure out the number of rows for each sail. It's no different than the triangle we used before. It's the same basic script that we used before, except here we're also going to figure out the number of spaces, and then we're going to print our spaces, print the stars for each sail, for the first sail, a couple spaces, and then the stars for the second sail. Now, here I used the multiple character print statement, except I also didn't allow it to end when it printed the first sail. We could use nested for loops on both of these. We've already demonstrated that in this code, so this is just a little bit simpler view. Then we're going to print a space at the end of that. That's going to give us our two sails. So this print gives us a blank line, and then we're going to create the whole of the boat. In the whole of the boat, we're going to print some spaces, and I'm using a number here between 1 and 5, so we're going to have 4 rows, and then we use that value of r in deciding the number of characters going across. And I want this to taper downward. So this is why I did a +6 minus r times 2. So as r increases in value, the number of characters here is going to decrease. I had to play around with this a little bit to find the right number in relation to the size of the sails to get it to look good. But this is the code. You can enter this into your project. I've got a blank line here. I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm going to run this. So here we want to do E, which is our sailboat. Again, I'll use X, and there is our sailboat. If I wanted to do another space or another shape, I could do D. There's our tree. I could do B, do my triangle. And I can keep making shapes until I'm done. And when I'm finished, I press the letter F, and I'm given the thank you statement. So all of our forks now work. You've seen how I built that a little bit at a time, how I went in and corrected some problems, and how I test each time to make sure what I want is what I'm getting. And then if it's not, I come back and figure out why and make those changes. This is a little bit harder program than we've been doing. It involves a little more math. And so I wanted to walk you through the process I would do to do this. And I think this is an assignment where it's very much of a learning opportunity. So you are welcome to copy my code as you work through this video. Make sure everything works, test it thoroughly, and then submit it for a grade, and you'll get some points.